Hey guys, what's going on, and welcome back to A to Zeke Sports. I have an awesome episode planned for you guys today, but before we dive into that, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any A to Zeke content. Today we're going to be looking at the greatest teams of all time, and at the end of the video, I'm going to reveal who I think is the greatest sports team of all time through all sports and the greatest team all time. And we will also be breaking down a recent sports topic at the end of this video, so make sure to watch to the end so you don't miss out on any of that. And again, please like and subscribe to the channel. That'd be great. So breaking into this topic, first I'm going to be breaking down some of the greatest sports teams for individual sports, and that'll help us get to see who were some of the greatest teams of all time before I make my decision who I think is the greatest. So first, looking at NBA basketball, there are three teams I want us to take a look at here. First of which being a recent team, the 2016 through 17 Golden State Warriors, who the year before had gone 73-9, which is the best record ever in the regular season for an NBA team. They did come up short that season, losing in 7 games to LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers that year. So that's why that team is not in my consideration. But this team that they had the year after that with Kevin Durant, one of the greatest scorers of all time, in my opinion, a top 25 player, also teamed with Steph Curry, one of the greatest shooters ever. And they had a great team. They only lost 15 times. They went 67-15, and they won the title, only losing once in the playoffs. It was in the finals to the Cavs, who they beat 4-1 in the finals. Another team I want to take a look at is the 2000 through 2001 Los Angeles Lakers with Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, another squad that only lost once in the playoffs. One factor I like to look at when looking at teams, one, like I said, being that they had to win the title that year, because if they weren't even the best team from that year, then I don't think they should be in consideration for the greatest team ever. Taking an example, the 2007 New England Patriots, who had a perfect season up into the Super Bowl, where they lost to Eli Manning and the New York Giants. So they would not be in consideration for me for one of the top teams ever, because if they weren't even the best team, or they didn't win the title from that year, then I don't think they should be in consideration for the greatest team of all time. That's why those 2007 Patriots and then the 15 and 16 Golden State Warriors aren't in consideration either. So this Los Angeles Lakers team. Oh yeah, and another point I wanted to look at is star power on that team. How they would have matched up with other teams in a face-off. So Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, those two stars, are the kind of the reason why they're here too, because of their performance in the playoffs, one of the greatest playoff performances ever, and how they were both stars, and how crazy it would be for them to match up against other teams like the 1995 through 96 Chicago Bulls, which is the last team we're going to look at. They had the second best record of all time in the regular season, going 72-10, but they did win the title last year. They did win the title that year. They only lost 3 times in the playoffs that year. They went 15-3, 2 of which coming to an also kind of stacked team, the Seattle Supersonics. And so this team, it was amazing to see what they could do in the regular season, and I think that's why they have an edge over probably the 16 and 17 Golden State Warriors, because of that their regular season record was better. And really, in a one-on-one, I could see them winning with Michael Jordan, the greatest player of all time. You've got Scottie Pippen, who was a great Robin to Jordan's Batman, and Dennis Rodman, the greatest rebounder of all time. You've got Steve Kerr, one of the greatest shooters ever. He leads the league all time in three-point percentage. And you've got Tony Kukoc, who is a very skilled player. And I think that really gives them over the edge over those Warriors and over the Lakers, I think, too, because of how their regular season was better. They have the second best record of all time. They won the title that year. And in a one-on-one, I think Jordan's team would prevail. And that is why I think that the 95 through 96 Chicago Bulls is my greatest NBA team ever. And so moving on to NFL football, there's also three teams I want to take a look at. First of which being the only perfect team ever, the 1972 Miami Dolphins, who were led by Coach Don Shula, who passed away a few months ago, one of the greatest coaches of all time. And so this was the only NFL team to ever have a perfect season. This was back when they only played 14 games, two less than they play in today's age. They only play they only played 14 games back then, and now they play 16. But they went 14-0 in the playoffs. No, they went 14-0 in the regular season, then going 3-0 in the playoffs, claiming a 17-0 record, and the only perfect team to ever play. And so, in my opinion, they definitely should be in consideration. There are also two other teams I want to look at. You've got the 1985 Chicago Bears, who were 15-1, one of the greatest regular seasons ever, and a very dominant postseason, winning the Super Bowl by a score of 46-10, one of the most crushing blowouts in Super Bowl history. Their defense was one of the most suffocating all time. They really could lock you down, shut you down. They were led by one of the greatest running backs ever, Walter Payton, and Mike Ditka, one of the greatest coaches ever. He's also a very good tight end back when he was in his playing career. So really, there is a lot of things you could discuss about this Bears team, but really just looking at what you can see on the surface, they are definitely, just looking at that, one of the greatest football teams of all time, and we'll come back to them in just a minute. The last team I want to look at is the 1979 Pittsburgh Steelers, who are really the best Steelers team of that dominant 1970s run by them. They won 4 Super Bowls in the 70s, and kind of that last Super Bowl they won was really the best we've seen from Bradshaw and Lynn Swann and Mean Joe Green. It's like all their star players it came out, and that was just the season they really could showcase everything they could do, and it just really, that's one of the reasons they're the greatest teams of all time, because it really emulated one of the most dominant dynasties of all time in one season. So that's why they're in consideration. But I do think the 1985 Chicago Bears beat both the 72 Dolphins and the 79 Steelers out for greatest team of all time, just because of the dominant regular season success in the area of 16 game regular season, and also against teams in little more expanded playoffs. And so that's one of the reasons. And the star power on the team, one-on-one, I think probably the Bears would win just because of the star power on that team. They had a great quarterback, and Walter Payton, one of the greatest running backs of all time, to lead them. Really, I think they would prevail in a matchup against either of these teams, and that's why I have them. It's my greatest football team of all time. Moving on to MLB baseball, we also have 3 teams here that I'd like to take a look at. The first of which being the 1975 Cincinnati Reds, led by second baseman Joe Morgan, renowned as one of the best base stealers and fastest players to ever play the game. Also, Pete Rose, a legend, playing third base, and you got Johnny Bench, the greatest catcher of all time. And so, with these 3 guys leading it, it's really hard to see how they couldn't be in consideration. They won 108 games that year. That's one of the best records for MLB baseball. And so their star power and the way they performed in the playoffs and the regular season really puts them here against two other Yankee teams. We've got the 1998 Yankees led by Derek Jeter, who put together a season where they won 114 games, which is absolutely incredible. In the modern age where you have to play 162 games, it was absolutely incredible, and they ended up winning that year by a good margin. They swept the World Series that year. It was an utterly dominant performance. And matching up, you could make a case that they might even beat the 1927 Yankees, led by Lou Gehrig, one of the greatest players of all time, and Babe Ruth. These two are baseball legends. And I really think when looking at this team, they played 154 game seasons back then, but they still managed to win 114 games. 110 games. The 98 Yankees won 114. 110 games, which actually puts them at a better winning percentage than the 98 Yankees. And so matching them up with these three teams, the team that I really think prevails is the 27 Yankees, just because they have the best winning percentage by a team. They also managed to, with these stars together on one team, they were able to, I think they'd be able to win on a 1-on-1 matchup against any of these other two teams. And that is why I'm going to pick the 1927 New York Yankees, led by Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. So we've got three teams singled out so far. We're going to move on to the National Hockey League, NHL. And really, I don't have three teams here. I'm just going to pick this one right out of the group. We've got the 1984 through 85 Edmonton Oilers. And I think they're the greatest team of all time. They went fifth greatest team of all time for hockey. They went 15-3 in the playoffs, which is utterly incredible. You don't see that very much in hockey. You see it more maybe in basketball. But for hockey, it's very hard because there's not as much scoring. So sometimes it's a little easier to lose if you have a couple defensive slip-ups. So I think, and this team was led by Wayne Gretzky, by far the greatest NHL player to ever live. For me, having players like that in such a good season really puts this team higher on my list, like the Bulls led by Jordan and Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig for the Yankees. And so I have this team here because of their dominance in the playoffs. I know you say that a lot for me, but seeing how they can perform just as well in the regular season as in the playoffs and how well they can do it against other top teams really shows me a lot about this team and the way they're able to perform and the way Wayne Gretzky performed. He had 30 goals scored in that playoffs, along with 30 assists, 47 points, which are two astounding records performed by a player. And really, these are the reasons why I have this team here in consideration for greatest team. We're going to move on now to soccer. We have a lot of teams you can discuss. There's a bunch of different pro teams. And then looking at national teams, I think really the greatest soccer team for all of those would probably be the 1970 Brazil national team in the World Cup, led by Pelé, in consideration for the greatest soccer player ever. And really, that's another reason why I have this team here, just because of how they were able to just beat out all these other amazing national teams with some of the greatest players from that country, and how Pelé was able to lead them over them in dominant fashion, adding to another trophy to Brazil's trophy case, who Brazil has won the most world titles out of any other country. And I think this team really shows the best of all those championships, and that's why I have them. There's the best soccer team ever. Also moving on to college football, I do have 3 teams in this category as well. First of which being the 1970 through 1971 Nebraska Cornhuskers, just the 1971 Nebraska Cornhuskers team, who had won a national championship the year before, but this year I think really was better. They were second in defensive points allowed with only 8, and then they scored 38 points per game on the offensive end, which was 3rd in the nation. So having 2 offensive and defensive, both those categories being so high, I think it's amazing to see like what they're put together. They beat Alabama in the Orange Bowl for the national championship 38-6, which is very amazing. See how much higher they were above even the second team that season in Alabama, one of the greatest programs of all time in college football, how they were able to take them down in such dramatic fashion in the Orange Bowl. And it was really amazing to see that Nebraska team, who also had another team that I almost put in my top 3, the 1995 Nebraska team, and the way they were able to perform. But I think so the Nebraska's dominance over the teams they faced in the national championship game wasn't quite as much as the 71 team's dominance over their teams. Another team I want to look at in this is a recent team, the 2019 LSU Tigers, who had an undefeated season and really took out Clemson, who also had a perfect season the year before. And they just seem to be a step above everybody that season, with Joe Burrow having one of the best statistical seasons ever by any player in college football to ever lived. And I know Clemson might be like, hey, why don't we have because they also had a undefeated season the year before, but we really didn't see quite as much the level of dominance and like you could tell looking at this LSU team, man, this team is special, man. Like you could tell everything. Like they were, if you were to match that team up, which was a little bit better than the Clemson team they defeated in the championship game this 2019 season. I think that the LSU team would still prevail just because it just had a little bit of running game. Their receivers matched up really well, but LSU did have better receivers, and their defense was just stifling, which is really a factor you can see in college football because there's a few really good defenses, but sometimes, most of the time, offense will overwhelm because there are some mistakes still being made by the younger players out there in college. But really, the one more team that I want to take a look at is the 2001 Miami Hurricane. Like these guys, everywhere you look on the roster is like a future star NFL player, which really gives me a lot of high points, at least in the A to Zeke opinions, because just the way they would have matched up against the other teams. But for me, and their defense was really incredible. Like that stretch Miami had the late 1990s, early 2000s, a similar stretch where the Yankees were dominant at that way. For me, it's just crazy because just their defense and how they were able to sustain that. It's just incredible for me looking back on that Miami team. But that was really the last of Miami's dominant period being beat by Ohio State the next year in double overtime. But the team I really think should come away from this college football team is the greatest ever would definitely be the 1971 Nebraska Cornhuskers. Just because if you look, they may not have a bunch of star players that you'd be like, oh, hey, look, I know them from the NFL. But just because of the way – and if you look at the regular season, They had an undefeated regular season, and then they destroyed Alabama, who was the second-ranked team, 38-6. So if you look, they had to face Oklahoma in the regular season and many other top teams. They had to face Texas too, who are in the Big 12. And just looking at who they had to beat and how they did it, that's definitely, for me, the greatest college football team of all time. And for me, looking back at college basketball, I think it's a clear pick who the greatest basketball team of all time is. It's definitely the 1997 UCLA Bruins, led by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the greatest coach of all time, John Wooden. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in my opinion, who back then was Lou Alcindor, is the greatest college basketball player of all time. He averaged 26 points per game and 15 rebounds per game in college. He had 3 national championships and only lost once in his career in college. So the star power on that team really puts us in high grade for me. And the coaching, too, I like to match up for coaching. Who would have outcoached in a close game between this team and that team? I think John Wooden, you can't really get better than that in terms of coaching. And I think he would have outcoached anybody and probably won against any college team. So that was the last team I was going to look at for these all times. So comparing them to the teams we have back so far, we have the 1995 through 96 Chicago Bulls. We have the 1927 New York Yankees. We have the what's next? We have the football team. We've got the Chicago Bears, the 1985 Chicago Bears, and then we've got the 1970 Brazil national soccer team. We've got 1971 Nebraska Cornhuskers, and then lastly we have the 67 Bruins, the UCLA Bruins. And so when comparing these, first I'm going to kind of look at their achievements during that season. For me, the team that really achieved, maybe at least for the 1970 Brazil national soccer team, there was not really like a regular season to look back at, like schedule. I know that they had to qualify and everything, but for me, like how they beat other not top national teams, but we didn't really get to see a lot of records or achievements. And that was back in the 70s. And so I'm trying to think here. So who should I eliminate? So maybe you could, for me, it's when it's going to come down to the college football teams and the men's basketball team in college. Probably couldn't take down the Bears, or maybe the UCLA couldn't take down the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. So I'm not going to pick those two, but I'm definitely going to give those two teams the title for greatest college teams ever. And so we're going to look at these other pro teams. And then I'm going to get rid of the 1970 Brazil team, just because there was only really one star player that stands out. There were other very talented players, but I think in terms of the talent and skill and what they were able to achieve, excuse me, during their time as a team, I definitely think these 4 other teams prevail. And then next team I'm going to get rid of is going to be the 1985 Chicago Bears. I think the Oilers definitely have an advantage over them because of how long the NHL season was, their dominance during that, and their dominance in the playoffs. And Wayne Gretzky, the greatest, who is the greatest hockey player of all time. The Bears did not have the greatest player of all time, in my opinion, even though they had one of the greatest ever in Walter Payton. So I'm going to get rid of them next. So we have it down to 3 teams. We've got the 1927 New York Yankees. We've got the 1995 through 96 Chicago Bulls. And we have the 1984 through 1985 Edmonton Oilers, led by Wayne Gretzky. And so for me, having the star power of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and having the best winning percentage of all time, which best, and they went undefeated in the postseason, which best all the things the Chicago Bulls have. Right, they have the second best record and the second best winning percentage. They lost 3 times in the playoffs, which is good, but the Yankees never lost, even though they did have to play less games. And the star power really outmatches, even though Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time, single greatest player of all time in basketball. You do have Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, who both have a case for being the greatest player. So for me, the Yankees beat them, and then they also beat the Oilers for that very same reason when you just have Gretzky versus Ruth and Gehrig. So there it is. That is my greatest team of all time, the 1927 New York Yankees. Please comment below to let me know what you guys think about that decision. And the next topic we're going to move on to is a recent topic. The Big Ten has officially decided to cancel the upcoming football season, which really breaks my heart. It's sad to see because Ohio State is my favorite team. I won't be getting to watch them this season. And even though they had already announced that they were going to go all conference, we won't even get to see them play at all, and then won't be selected for the playoffs this year either. So that's going to be really sad to see. The SEC is standing strong, though, saying that they will still play a season, which I'll be glad to hear. You guys can still watch college football games, so make sure to check that out. And that is going to wrap up my episode of A to Zeke Sports. Make sure to like this video again, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any A to Zeke Sports. Please do make sure to comment below anything you want to correct me on if my data was wrong for this episode, anything you might want to see in an upcoming episode, and I'll make sure to take a look at those. And maybe I'll call you out in an episode if you gave me the idea, and tell the audience that you gave me that idea. So thank you guys again so much for watching. That wraps up our episode of A to Zeke Sports.